Tell us who you are.
Hello, my name is Ron Pradapati. I will be attending Auburn University in the fall with a major in economics and finance.
That's all right, son. I'm sure you'll do fine later in life. That'll be all right. It's okay. Come on, dog.
Good morning. My name is Bassem Naim. I will attend Vanderbilt University this fall, and I will study public health.
How about that?
Hi, I'm Carter DeWeese. I plan to attend Yale University to study political science. And these are our wonderful coaches, Miss Jane Schaefer and Miss Amy Maddox, and we're very excited to be here this morning.
We are too. Thank you. And yes, they are wonderful judges. You're absolutely right about that. Francine, when he said where he was going, I saw your fist.
Well, I was cheering for the political science major.
Oh, I see for that. That's great. That's good. That's good. Ms. Maddox and Ms. Schaefer are wonderful friends and wonderful teachers. Y'all are blessed to have them, but I expect y'all know that by now. I imagine. Jocelyn, you want to introduce yourself too?
Absolutely. Good morning. Is it still morning? Yes, it's still, well, it's morning for me, so. Good morning. My name is Jocelyn Broman. I am a We the People alumni, competed back in nationals in 2006. I currently work on Capitol Hill for Representative Paul Cook of California.
And I'm Francine Engel. I'm a political scientist and a constitutional scholar, and from the state of Maryland. Yeah, I work for the Maryland Civics and History Education. With that.
They are really good. They'll ask you good questions. I'm Mike Miles. I'm the treasurer of Jefferson County, and I live down the hill from this school, but I have not gotten to see this unit on purpose. We have one other guest, Chris, online. It looks like Dr. Stevens, the state coordinator, is a guest on the page. That's probably him. He does rowing classes on the lake, and so that's probably him in the boat that he's rowing. He's just showing off to us this afternoon, I guess. All right, let's rock and roll. Y'all ready to do question 3, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'll read it real quick. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution provides that state legislatures can determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, yet gives Congress the power to make or alter such regulations. What are the advantages and disadvantages of a uniform election process? What responsibility do state legislators, state election officials, and citizens have in maintaining free and fair elections? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the trustee and delegate theories of representation as they apply to congressional districts? Congratulations to you for all of the work. I know it's been a lot of hard work to get here, so we'll have fun this morning. You ready?
Thank you. Should we begin?
You may.
President Johnson called the 1965 Voting Rights Act a triumph for freedom as huge as any victory that has ever been won on any battlefield. Our high school is a short drive from the Shelby County Board of Registrars, which sued in Shelby County v. Holder 2013. The Supreme Court struck down the critical pre-clearance provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, originally implemented to combat discriminatory practices of southern localities like Shelby County.
Federalism creates a perpetual debate between equal protection and states' rights. Historically, our lack of a uniform election process has provided both advantages and disadvantages. Originally, the Constitution didn't specify who had the right to vote, leaving this to state legislatures. Yet, large-scale enfranchisement has primarily come through federal reforms as opposed to local revision. The 15th Amendment prevented voting discrimination based on race, but many states instilled Jim Crow laws to prevent African American participation. While the 1965 Voting Rights Act was a big step forward, after Shelby County, many states instilled electoral restrictions like Alabama's closure of DMVs and polling places. A uniform election process would have prevented localized discrimination. However, some states led the charge for equality long before nationwide reform. Voting rights for free Black Americans was enshrined in 6 pre-convention state constitutions long before the 15th Amendment. Additionally, women were granted suffrage in New Jersey in 1807, more than a century before the 19th Amendment. State legislatures can create local electoral reform. Maine is the only state to have a ranked choice voting, a manner of voting we support as highly democratic. Arguably, our federal system provides each individual with more power to influence voting protections on the local level.
Furthermore, our federal system requires cooperation between local and federal officials. The United States prides itself on democratic values built on fair and secure elections. The organization Common Cause of Georgia sued Georgia's Secretary of State after a cybersecurity expert found that a simple Google search could have exposed 6 million voters' information. This case would later be dismissed. Additionally, a Senate report determined that the Russian government had, quote, directed extensive activity against U.S. election infrastructure at the state and local levels. Cybersecurity at even local and state level elections was, quote, sorely lacking. We believe state legislatures should protect the equity of elections through preemptive or counteractive legislation if and when needed, and election officials should establish higher levels of election security. They are responsible for ensuring both the physical and digital security of our elections.
But digital election security hasn't always been an issue. When the House and Senate were designed, a primary concern was the kind of representation each provided. In theory, representatives in the House were to reflect the delegate theory. Thus, the Constitution gave them short, 2-year terms, forcing them to directly respond to changing interests. In contrast, senators act as trustees and serve 6-year terms. Before the 17th Amendment, citizens didn't even elect senators. Initially, the framers balanced both theories to account for the lack of widespread information and to increase stability in transfers of power like the Revolution of 1800. Today, the abundance of information available in the age of social media can be overwhelming and misleading or simply untrue. Trustees are typically more informed than the people they serve, which enables them to tackle complex policy issues such like healthcare and national security.
When LBJ signed the Voting Rights Act, he asserted, to seize the meaning of this day, we must recall darker times. As Alabamians, while we continue the push for equal access to voting, we must remember our history and respond to evolving threats like cybersecurity or COVID-19. Because we don't have a uniform election process, each of us can make change happen at home, and there's much work to be done in Sweet Home, Alabama. Thank you for listening. We're now ready for your questions.
Thank you for the essay, and I would only add one word, and that was amen to your last sentence. I would just agree with that. I think everybody may have noticed, but if they haven't, the National Director of the We the People program has dropped in with us this morning. Mr. Lemming, welcome to this hearing. We're glad to have you. He's muted right there. We're glad you're here. I don't usually ask the first question, but when you were talking about the trustee and the delegate selection, Jocelyn asked a question earlier today that I really liked. Which of those two would you rather have as your member of Congress? A person who will go up there and represent what you think and what you believe and vote the way you want them to vote, or a person that goes up there and uses their own judgment even if you disagree with them, if they think that they're looking out for your interests better that way? Which would you prefer?
Well, honestly, it depends on which body of Congress we're talking about. So if we're talking about the Senate, so there are only 2 senators for the entire state, and there are many different districts, and not the entire state is the same. Like I can safely say that a place in Southern California is very different from Northern California. So for senators, I would agree that the trustee theory works because they represent not only a small district like House representatives, but they also represent the entirety of the state.
Yeah, if I had to choose between the delegate theory and the trustee theory, I would choose a trustee theory. As a far-out example, so in Nevada, a congressional district elected a former brothel owner, and he was a former brothel owner because he was dead by the time he was elected. So that just goes to show that misinformation can really pervade itself into elections such as that.
I would say, personally, I would prefer the trustee theory, but it's incredibly important that I would actually trust the representative or the senator to translate my values into policy beliefs. And there aren't honestly a whole lot of politicians that I feel that way about. And so I would say most of the time it would be delegate theory, but there are some trustees that I would trust to translate my values correctly.
You're a very wise young man. Francine, you want a shot at him?
Yes. Do you feel that there are any groups that are still disenfranchised? You kind of brought this up a little bit. What groups may still be disenfranchised and why?
I would say in Alabama, and especially southern states like Alabama, South Carolina, and North Carolina that have implemented voter ID laws, we've seen that these laws disproportionately affect African Americans and those living in rural areas, which go hand in hand in the Black Belt in the South. And so we see that they're more disenfranchised than their neighboring counties. And former Alabama Governor Robert Bentley, after Alabama passed a voter ID law, he ordered the closure of DMVs and polling places in primarily African-American Black Belt counties. So we've seen that those groups are disenfranchised. Additionally, I would say a key group that's been disenfranchised is some of the working class, fast food workers that have to work a 12-hour shift on election day. How exactly are they going to get to the polls in a state that makes it somewhat difficult to do absentee voting. And those often are African Americans, especially in cities like Birmingham.
Yeah, so one answer to the question is actually found in the text of the Constitution. So one of the amendments, I think 14th to 15th, outlines that the right to vote extended to all except Indians that are not taxed. So that's a whole subclass of Native Americans that are still not taxed. And that does, still pervade from our long American history of suppression against them. It's still something that's present today.
Also, with the ruling in Shelby County v. Holder, which struck down the critical pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act, what this basically does is, so the voter ID laws that Carter mentioned earlier that Alabama put in place, they wouldn't have been able to do it before Shelby County v. Holder, but with this ruling, they're allowed to do this.
Which level of government should be most responsible for election security and for having free and fair elections? Should it be the state legislature, the federal government, or the state election officials?
I would say that often that the federal government's role is actually overlooked in this process. A lot of individuals look to states to create paper trails or create reform individually, but progress is difficult to achieve in all 50 states separately, and sometimes it's easier to achieve in all 50 states united. And since this is a national security issue, I would say that the ultimate burden falls on the national government to set guidelines and fight against foreign interference.
Is that only for election interference, or is it election security is at federal level and then something else should be at a different level?
I think the federal government has to provide a baseline for the minimum that states should do basically to maintain free and fair elections. I think we're going to see this especially prevalent during the COVID-19 crisis. We're going to see that some states might not even implement mail-in voting by themselves. Right now, only 28 states and DC have no excuse, like when you don't need an excuse for an absentee ballot. And so I think the federal government has to do more. The House has tried to pass a new Voting Rights Act, but they haven't been able to get it through the Senate.
And this is also highlighted by many gerrymandering cases. With the new 2020 census, Alabama's most likely going to lose one of their House representatives. And like with cases like Baker v. Carr and Reynolds v. Sims, so all these cases outline that political gerrymandering is not right, but it's also a political question. So that it's a job for one of the other branches of government to look after. And if the federal government isn't passing legislation,
finish your talk.
If the federal government isn't passing legislation to stop political gerrymandering, then I don't see how the citizens' votes, the core of democracy, can be protected.
Before we try to analyze all that you said, let us do this for you first. Nice job. Well done. That was fun. That was fun to listen to. Francine, I think we have the answer to your question. Yes, they did do Shelby v. Holder.
Nice.
We wondered with Bob earlier in the day. I made a bet.
Bring up Shelby County.
That's
No.
right. Earlier in the day, Bob, I made a bet with Chris about how many times I'd hear Alabama mentioned as the place that abuses voting rights and has court cases revolving around it. This is the 6th group we've heard, and I think we're up to 19 mentions of Alabama so far. I think maybe it's just 18. I lost count after a while. I'm not sure, but we're the petri dish for how to suppress it. Somebody said other states have wrestled with the issue of voter suppression. Alabama has turned it into an art form, and I believe we probably have. I guess I don't know. Jocelyn, you look pensive. What do you think about what they said?
Looking over my notes, and I will definitely say I liked in your statement how you gave an overarching theme of equal protection versus states' rights. And then you kind of like filled that out for the uniform system of voting. You gave a lot of examples of where creativity among states has resulted in like new ideas, like the ranked choice voting in Maine, the all mail-in voting in Oregon. And yet right now we're struggling with how do we balance that, the need for uniformity and the need for security with that need to allow states to innovate and do something new. So I think you guys did a great job in your statement of working through that as well. For my follow-up question, when I talked about what's the most responsible for election security, you have the cybersecurity aspect. But then there's also, but that's a federal like defense outward looking thing. But then you also have what does free and fair mean in terms of disenfranchisement and things like that. And so the question is does that actually belong on the state level, on the county level, local level? So I would have liked a little bit more discussion about that, but the answer that I got, that the federal government's impact in election security is overlooked, that's accurate, because Department of Homeland Security does a whole bunch of stuff when it comes to election interference and making sure that foreign actors aren't interfering in what we do what we do when we're electing. And so you guys did a great job. Hadn't heard Revolution of 1800 yet in regards to delegate and trustee, so
Yeah.
good. It was good. Like that example. So I'll hand it off, but great job, guys.
Yeah, you know what I really enjoyed is you did a really good job of blending contemporary topics, bringing it up to COVID-19, which we're dealing with now. But you had a lot of historical examples, a lot of court cases to back you up. So you really, anchored it in history, but also brought it up to date with current events. And you blended that well, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was, you kind of made that distinction between the delegate and the trustee theory of House of Representatives with delegate and trustee with the Senate. And then you kind of use that again in sort of responding to our question about which one do you like more. I think it's kind of an interesting way to think about it, interesting distinction with that. So nice job.
Well, I agree. I'm enjoying listening to the two of them. Yeah, the thing I wish we now had, if Chris would sell me that time card for a few minutes, I would like to have 30 minutes with you for the three of us to ask you, so how would you fix it? You've done a great job of identifying what you needed to identify for us this morning, which is what the problems were and the court cases that speak to them. Now I'd love to know how you keep a partisan election official, a secretary of state or a probate judge, from using their influence unfairly to influence the outcome of an election. Would you give them civil fines if they were judged to have been doing it? How would we fix it? Also, as far as the trustee and delegate business, the thing that we don't talk about that much is I would trust a representative to be a trustee of me right after I saw their financial disclosure form. I would like to see who gave them the money to put them in the office before I decided whether to surrender my thoughts about how he or she should vote to who put them there in the first place. Because sometimes, it's not money of people I know that put them there in the first place. But not only the court cases, but the mix of practical application to constitutional theory was as good as we'll hear today. This is the last thing I'll say. This is the first time I had a chance to say it doubly today. Bob Lemming has said a lot of times, Bob, that this competition is teacher driven. The teacher's devotion to the program makes a huge difference. And they say the greatest gift a person can have in life is the gift of a good teacher. Well, in that case, you have been doubly blessed, because Amy Maddox and Jane Schaefer are as fine of teachers as they come, and to get to watch their class perform is an inspiration to me every chance I get to do it. Thank you all for this today.
Thank you, Mom.
Outstanding. Thanks.